Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Stacy Glass. I'll serve as your host for the Coffee Break series, along with our communications lead, Sonia Elmquist. Sonia will be monitoring the chat and the questions and the polls. So please interact with her while you're there. Because this is such a short coffee break, we aren't going to have time to do much Q&A. But if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat and we'll follow up after the session. You probably know Credo and the other featured guests we have in this series, but you may not know Chem Forward. We're a nonprofit science-based organization that's growing a shared database of chemical hazard assessments for safer alternatives in multiple sectors. We're working in beauty and personal care, electronics, and food packaging for now. We have a deep belief that when people have better data, that they make better decisions, and we're here to create access to that. So let's dive into today's conversation. If you do any search on clean beauty, you will find Mia Davis. If you ask anyone about clean beauty, they will refer you to Mia Davis. If you reach out to Mia Davis, she will get you on the path to clean beauty with her master classes, her playbooks, her guidance. And that's exactly how we connected with Mia over a year ago. Mia has been a clear and unwavering voice for a holistic approach to better consumer products for over a decade. From the campaign for safer cosmetics to the early days of Beauty Counter, and now to the largest retailer dedicated solely to clean beauty. Please welcome Mia Davis, the Director of Environmental and Social Responsibility at Credo. Hi, Mia.
Hi, Stacy. Thank you.
It really is your generosity, your collaborative spirit, and your deep belief in systems transformation that bring you here today and that brought us together. And I want to thank you for sitting down for this coffee break. So let's kick off with, tell us, how did you come to this work and why does it matter to you?
Well, thank you for having me and thank you for the kind words. So I came to this work because I was a born environmentalist. But in my graduate work, or I suppose in college, I started to work on corporate accountability. And then in my graduate work, I really started to think a lot about toxic chemicals and where they were going. So I kind of moved beyond the more traditional thinking of like the environment is out there, right? Like the river and the ocean, the trees, the landscape, and started to think more about the environment as the built environment, our homes, our schools, our workplaces, but also our own body as a first environment. And it really started to recognize that there was a kind of a false dichotomy or distancing between human health and the environment as out there. And so I started to couple my love of the environment with my passion for corporate accountability. Back then, there wasn't a lot of talk about mission-driven or purpose-driven businesses. There were a few around like Ben & Jerry's and Cliff Bar and certainly Patagonia and a few others that I really looked up to always. But I really wanted to think about how can we work to reduce our exposure to toxic chemicals and protect the environment and protect human health and marry that also with sustainability. So that was kind of how I came into this. And then started working around plastics. One of my first campaigns was on BPA before it was a kind of a household term, working to get bisphenol A out of baby bottles, sippy cups and water bottles. And started working with the campaign for safe cosmetics and got to do some market-based work with some early leaders there. And that led me, as you said, to Beauty Counter and Credo Beauty and a bunch of other really cool, I think, innovative brands in the space.
Yeah. That's great. That wonderful journey, kind of that's always been a part of your environment from growing up to school to your early work. Not everybody has that. I know I came late to the green movement, but I'm glad I got here eventually. Yeah. So we have this series, the Science of Clean Beauty, and we started out last week with Boma Brown West from EDF, offering us sort of a definition, like would a clear definition of clean beauty sort of help us all to accelerate in the same direction here. And I think the general feeling from our audience last week was yes, it would. And Credo, you have developed a real vision for clean beauty, and let's bring up the graphic, and I'm hoping that you can describe this to us, Mia.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, Boma's wonderful. She is also on Credo's Clean Beauty Council, and I've known her for years, and I really, really respect her work and what EDF is doing around reducing our exposure to toxic chemicals in a variety of consumer products, but especially beauty. So it's awesome that you kicked this series off with BOMA. Yeah, so this is our handy Venn diagram that describes Credo's position on clean beauty, how we define clean beauty. So I'll spend a couple minutes talking about our definition, and then, you know, part of the rest of our conversation will be about how we operationalize that and the need for more data, right?
Yeah.
So Credo's definition of clean, which we want to share with others, we really want others to adopt this, and you know, if it works for them, everyone is welcome to this definition. Clean is really at the nexus of these orbs that I'll briefly describe, and they're all held within this larger bubble of transparency. So the first is safety. And what we mean by safety is an ingredient or a product's potential to cause harm. So what is the hazard of an ingredient inherently, and what is the potential risk of using a product with that ingredient? So, you know, risk will change obviously based on, you know, the amount of the ingredient used, the quality of the ingredient used, and the exposure. So something might have a higher, relatively high hazard, but a lower risk if you use it dermally versus inhaling it, right? So this is really getting to safety. The next, moving over to the left, would be sourcing. So source is about, is the ingredient natural? Is it naturally derived? Is it synthetic? It's where is it from? Was it made by humans? Was it made by nature? And so many of the ingredients in our space are some combination therein, lots of naturally derived ingredients. And so, you know, there's a lot of overlap between the sourcing of an ingredient and its safety, but they are not one and the same thing, which is why clean is different than natural, right? Mm-hmm. Our definition of clean is something that is a little more holistic in the truest sense of the word. So that's source. Sustainability, down at the bottom, is around how an ingredient was grown, harvested, mined, or manufactured. So you can have an ingredient with a great safety profile that is naturally sourced that is not very sustainable. So an example of this could be palm oil or palm derived ingredients, right? It's generally recognized as safe, it's natural or naturally derived depending on the ingredient. It could be done sustainably, but unfortunately it's often not grown sustainably. They're oftentimes on plantations, you know, there's clear cutting, all kinds of, you know, kind of egregious growing practices that affect the land, the local ecosystem, the local communities. And then you have also, you know, the carbon footprint of shipping these ingredients and products all over the world. So these are all sustainability factors. And not that I'm picking on palm oil, actually don't want to boycott palm oil. I want it to be done better and more sustainably. But I use that to hopefully make the point that you can have something that is both safe and natural, but not necessarily sustainable, which is why we have all of these orbs here.
Yeah.
So the next is ethics. And this one can be possibly the squishiest or biggest of the buckets, because it can be the hardest to pin down certification or some sort of assurance around ethics. So for us, ethics includes, were the people who were growing or mining or making this ingredient or product treated fairly? Mm-hmm. Were they paid a fair living wage? You know, was child labor used in the harvesting of that mica, for example? It would also include animal welfare. If it's an animal derived ingredient, how are those animals treated? And of course, ethics can also be bigger, like bigger about, you know, society and our practices in this industry. So are we, you know, is the ingredient or the product being marketed to people of color in a way that is extremely harmful and disrespectful, not only necessarily in its toxicity, but in its message? Like, you know, your skin needs to be lighter, your hair needs to be straighter. That could also fall under this bigger bucket of ethics. And of course, you know, I mentioned in the beginning that this all has a through line of transparency, because if we're not more transparent about the ingredients and the supply chain and all of these factors, how can we know that something is clean? How can we really speak intelligently about its safety if we don't have the safety data that we need? How can we talk about the sustainability if we don't even know if it's a naturally derived ingredient or not, right? So there's all these overlaps between the orbs here, safety, sourcing, sustainability, and ethics, and the need for greater transparency you know, and sometimes that can be as apparent as disclosing fragrance ingredients, right? Or it can be as in the weeds and more down the supply chain for suppliers and brands where you're like asking for basic information about country of origin, et cetera. And that could be about transparency. So I know we'll come back to some of this, and thank you for allowing me to show this. Like, I love a Venn diagram. Thank you for allowing me to illustrate that. For Credo, what we really value is what we really see as clean beauty, the way that we define it and operationalize it, is all of these really important criteria.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that for every ingredient, for every product, you're going to be able to check off all these boxes right now. I'm not implying that you walk into a Credo store and everything that you find on the shelf ticks off safety, sourcing, ethics, you know, because we're not there yet. But this is where we're headed, and it's both our definition and our guidance.
Wow, really appreciate the holistic approach here to a definition for clean beauty. And I'd love to engage the audience here in a poll question. You just saw how Credo defines clean beauty, the nexus of safety, sourcing, sustainability, and ethics, with transparency as this through line. Which aspect is most difficult for you to operationalize? And we'll put up a list here. And I did force you to just choose one here, because we'd like to ask Mia to speak more in depth about the voting here once you've had a chance to do that. And then also, as we continue to talk, please use your chat box to tell us more about the challenges that you experience in operationalizing these various aspects of clean beauty. While you're voting, and Sonia will take that down at the appropriate time, let me go ahead and continue on with you, Mia. Safe is, you know, we could argue that all of these are important, but safe may be the most important because we're talking about chemicals that we put on our bodies every day. But it's difficult, if you're not a chemist or a toxicologist, to make sense of the data, and it can be expensive to get a professional opinion. What are some of the barriers and enablers that you experience, that you work with your supply chain on, to make data more available?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest barrier is that it's not required, right? It's not required by US law to share data on safety endpoints. You know, certainly there are some in the cosmetic industry that say that, you know, the laws are absolutely sufficient and that this is one of the safest industries out there. And, you know, we could argue points on that, but certainly I think we can all agree that you're not really required to share much information on the ingredients that you're bringing to market in the United States, even if they're used on vulnerable populations on their skin all day long, every day. So when you don't have that mandate from state and federal governments to show the data, that is a number one barrier. Fortunately, we see a lot of market movement, and there is, like, obviously some great state movement too, and you know, federal policy should be getting an overhaul at some point, and I think that this will change certainly in the next few years. I hope that we see that. But in the meantime, we've seen a lot of market movement to really incentivize some bigger changes. So, you know, a lot of brands have restricted substance lists, RSLs, whether they're called, at Credo, it's called the dirty list. That's like the public facing name for it. Internally, we call it our RSL. Some of them are really robust. The one, you know, that I worked on at Beauty Counters is called the Never List, and it's huge. And I know other brands have no lists and blacklists. And the one that we have at Credo that all 135 of our brand partners need to adhere to is around 3,000 ingredients that we're prohibiting. So that even goes beyond the European Union's approximately 1,500 ingredients that they ban. So that's great to have a restricted substance list. If there is data that indicates that something is harmful to human health or the environment, or that it's incredibly unsustainable, it is good to prohibit that. But then that, of course, begs the question, what are you replacing it with? And if you're replacing it with something that has no data, that can result in a regrettable substitution at worst. That, you know, and we see that happen in beauty, but in a bunch of different industries. BPA actually is a good example of that, right? Getting rid of bisphenol A and replacing it with bisphenol S, and it's just kind of tomato. You know, we can't just do like the whole whack-a-mole with one ingredient at a time. We need to take a much more holistic approach to how we are choosing materials. So, to answer your question, what are some of these big barriers for brands? Whether you have a chemistry or toxicology degree or not, it's a barrier if you don't have the basic information to feel empowered to make a better decision, or to bring it back to a team that can help you decipher the data if you are not able to. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. That's, I would say, absolutely barrier number one. And what we're trying to do, I think, in the clean beauty movement, and certainly at Credo with all of our brand partners, is to say we are not just going to have this restricted substance list and then hope for the best with what we're replacing. We're going to reward the suppliers with our dollars, with our business. We're going to reward the suppliers who supply that data. So instead of, having, all these endpoints that we ask for information on, and then having it be like NA when you ask for data, it's not applicable. It's totally applicable. It's just that you either don't have it or you're not sharing it. And therefore we're going to give our business to someone else.
Yeah. That's a real powerful market driver.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. And let's, so what I'm gathering from that, some of the barriers are it's not required. So this is totally voluntary, but the market is stepping in the absence of regulation, but also not having the data. So creating a situation where more data is available, more data is shared, and we can get that in the hands would be helpful. And then retailers like you, organizations like you, rewarding their supply chain for bringing forth that data. That's a really nice systems transformation model that you just presented there. Thank you.
Yeah, it is about a system transformation. You're absolutely right. And when I say like there is no data, I know I've talked to some people, counterparts in other really large companies, like multinationals that are in this space, that are like, we have the data exists. It's not a hard time to get your hands on the data. So what I mean is accessible data that has been ideally, peer reviewed, but if not, just available to decision makers. It doesn't have to be all the endpoints. It doesn't have to be, the gold standard of what we would want to see to make the most informed decision, but it's certainly better to have something than nothing. And it shouldn't be extremely expensive or very time consuming to access it. I mean, ultimately we care about consumer health and the environment. That's why we're doing this and why we're leading the movement on clean. But also it comes down to brand reputation and liability. Whether you're a retailer or a brand making this stuff, I refuse to accept the idea that that it's proprietary or that it's not applicable. What I put in a product that I'm making and selling to people to put all over their bodies and their babies and wash down the drain, absolutely that information should be made available.
Yeah. And I think at some point when it is readily available, as you suggest, that even investors will want to know what's the risk profile, of them. That's great. Well, let's check in with our poll results. Sonia, will you go ahead and post that for us? Okay, the majority, pretty well distributed here, but transparency is a pain point. Can you speak more to transparency?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's almost like we teed that up, isn't it? With the last comment about just needing the information. And again, it doesn't have to be perfection. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. Some is better than none. So for transparency, for me, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it can mean a few different things with regard to clean beauty and the science of beauty. It means if you're saying that something is a restricted substance, and define what that means. If it's banned, if it's prohibited from your brand's line, from the formulating of a certain product, a certain SKU from a retailer, does that mean at trace levels, like down to any detectable level? Does it mean at a certain percentage or volume of a product or for certain exposures? It needs to be clearly defined. That's one issue around transparency, because I know that, you can prohibit parabens, but then if you're buying a bunch of raw ingredients that contain parabens, then for me, that's a transparency issue, and people need to know that. Also around fragrance and a few other ingredients for which there is, a lot of loopholes around disclosure. We're really pushing for greater fragrance transparency. We want brands to share it with customers. We want everyone to know what the constituents are that make up fragrance. But even with the most basic level, I work with a lot of indie brands that go to their fragrance house or go to their suppliers and say, yeah, we want it to be natural, according to ISO natural standards, but also I want to know what's in it. I might not put it on my ingredient label, but I need to know. And then to hear, no, like that's proprietary. You're not welcome to know what's in the product that you're buying. And that, again, that's their brand liability. That's a major transparency issue. And then, at the ingredient level, when contract manufacturers are buying products or when brands are formulating products, they need to be able to find out basic information about that ingredient to get back to those trace ingredients or restricted substances, to get back to quality. Perhaps they have other parameters that they're serving, like, they want to be vegan, or a certain percentage needs to be natural or naturally derived in order to make certain claims. They need to know the source of the ingredient, not just, it's great to know that it's from a plant. It's even better to know what plant and, not corn and or soy and or people have allergies. People need to know where ingredients are coming from. And I understand that it is more work for suppliers and the people who have to do all the tracking around the quality and batches and whatnot, but that's where we are. That's just where we need to be headed. And we need to accept that that's the writing on the wall. And we're going to start to, as we said, incentivize those types of purchases, and the early adopters will be rewarded.
Yeah.
So those are just some examples of transparency. I'm sure that the folks who filled out that poll probably agree with a lot of those, but maybe there are more that are sticking out for them. And I'm sure that I would agree too. I just want to, I think, like one more point on transparency. I think that the old, more traditional capitalist way of thinking about a lot of this is, it's mine, I need to know. I'm disincentivized to share because somebody might steal it, or I could get in trouble for sharing, right? We have had, especially with regard to the health, like testing on certain health endpoints, right? It's better not to know. If I know that something could cause harm when it's inhaled, or I know that if it's sourced from this place, there's going to be more quality issues than over here, then I would just rather not know where it's sourced from. I think that, to your earlier point, Stacey, about investors getting more savvy, consumers are certainly more savvy. I think that we're seeing a pivot, and I would really encourage the audience members who aren't already like on the transparency train to think about that. The earlier we start to recognize that it's better to know than not to know, because then you can make a better decision. Yeah, that.
That's a really powerful point. And I'm so glad that you just highlighted that. And I want to go back to one that you just made a minute ago too, which is that when the supply chain comes together, when retailer comes together and communicates a consistent message to their supply chain, we can get everybody moving in the same direction. And I think you're powerfully trying to do that, and openly sharing that with other retailers who may want to join in, or who may already have a similar thing going on. A consistent message to the supply chain has been proven in other sectors to rapidly move people away from the bad stuff and towards the good stuff, and into transparency. So I've gotten a little off point. So let me get back on point. In our last few minutes, can you offer a few things that brands and manufacturers and formulators who are listening today can do to operationalize and lead in clean beauty? Your top pro tips.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the definition that I laid out for Credo's definition of clean beauty is operationalized in a very robust Credo clean standard. So when we are working with our brand partners to make this like how we walk the walk, not just talk the talk, we have a lot of tips and resources and ways to ask the questions. So that's something that I would share as a major tip. Ask hard questions. Ask for it in writing. Is it a certification? Is it on letterhead? What kind of assurance do you need to make sure that you are getting the ingredient that you want? Whether it comes down to just like specifications, like a spec sheet or a C of A or a country of origin, or if it's something that's a little less well tracked, like in that ethics bucket, right? Ask the hard questions and get it in writing. And if they can't give it to you, still ask the hard questions. And if you end up having to go with that supplier anyway because of lack of availability out in the market, keep asking the hard questions, because that's how we're going to normalize this data and improving the supply chain. Another is, don't just be okay with the restricted substance list. Like, let's definitely move away from just what we're not using and start to think much more comprehensively about what we are using and why, and how we can continue to move the needle. And relatedly, like, I think the third is, I don't see clean beauty. The clean beauty I want and the clean beauty movement that I am working to create is not a destination. It's a journey. And that is also not an excuse to say like, oh, well, who knows when we will have arrived, right? We'll just kind of make like small incremental progress. I'm all about big paradigm shifts and system transformation. But also, it's not like we're just going to be done. Like, oh my gosh, here we've arrived and everything's better now. We have all the safety information that we could ever need on these ingredients and everything's done sustainably. Like, clearly that's not going to be the case. Maybe for certain raw materials or certain simple formulations, but for things like tinted moisturizers and deep conditioning products, and there's a lot of it's a journey, not a destination. So keep moving, keep asking hard questions, keep thinking about how we can improve not just the goop in the bottle, but the packaging is a major piece of this clean puzzle. A lot of harmful chemicals and unsustainable practices there. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I've also, I grew up in this movement and in this industry, and I have seen such amazing change at the state level with policy, huge market change, huge consumer awareness change. And now we're working with folks like you at Come Forward to get a much more user-friendly tool and platform so that we can make better, more informed decisions, which is huge.
Thank you, Mia. Fantastic. Very actionable tips. I really appreciate it. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to close with, you can follow our progress on LinkedIn or visit our website at chemforward.org. And we hope that you'll join us next week for another coffee conversation with Carly Klikas from Sephora. She's the manager of product sustainability at Sephora. And there's no need to re-register. If you're registered for this session, you are registered for that session. So just tune in again. We want to thank everybody, and Mia, many thanks. You are amazing and so generous. And we will revisit with you later. I know we have another topic already lined up.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Congratulations on your launch. And I can't wait to work with you guys more.
Thanks, Mia. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for participating.